This is a review of Week 9, Chapter 8, Practice It on classes. I previously produced a video that went over the first initial self-checks as well as this exercise, and I think that should still apply. In particular, I told people that the toString for exercise 14 must use string.format and build it yourself from the x and y values such as p1.x. I'll review this later, but half of you got it wrong because you didn't read this hint. That's a huge hint right there. Okay, so let's talk about self-check starting at 16. The ones in the middle were pretty straightforward, but a lot of people had problems starting at 16. So we're going to do 16 through 21. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. Okay, so this is self-check 8.16. The reason why most everybody missed this, and I have no idea why this would happen, but half of you decided to delete this class point here, which specifically says point class must be submitted with your solution. Do not modify. And yet half of you deleted it. So yeah, that's why it didn't work. But let's go over how you're going to do this anyways. So the code that was missing is they wanted you to construct 2 point objects here. So you do new point, okay, and then we create point objects to assign them to. And you know, I still see a lot of people confused about the constructors and the private data. So let's take this opportunity, since we have an entire class definition, to review this again. So the class has either public or private member variables. And these ones are public, and that matches the Java definition of the point class. The book also shows what happens if we create these as private, and I talked about that in my previous tutorial. So if you make them private, then they cannot be seen outside of the class, and you can no longer do p1.x and p1.y. We don't actually do that here, but I could do a system.out.println of p1.x. Okay, that will work because it's public. As soon as I change it to private, that's not going to work. Okay, so that's our class data. Then let's look for creators. Okay, so how do we know? How does the compiler know that there's a constructor? It's because there is no return type here, and the name of the function is exactly the name of the class. Okay, some people tried to create a constructor by changing the name of the class. You can't do that. The compiler won't know it's a constructor. Or they tried to put in something, you know, I'm just going to give an example, some return type. And again, the compiler is not going to know that's your constructor. Okay. Then inside the constructor, a lot of people were going ahead and creating their own variables here, int x and int y. Okay, these have no relation whatsoever to your class variables. These ones up here are available throughout your class, and they are equivalent to using this.x and this.y. That's how you access them. If I just create an x and y here, they are just locals. They are only known from the start of this bracket to the end of that bracket. That's the only place they exist. And when you go away, when the routine is over, those variables go away. Okay, so that's why we don't declare variables there. Here is something that's more relevant, where you're taking an int x and an int y. They're using a local routine set location, but it's basically this exact code. This.x, that means that, equals the parameter x equals the parameter y. Okay, some people got confused because when they tried to do a toString, they would use getX and getY. It turns out the Java implementation of getX and getY don't actually return ints, they return doubles. And so if you used it in the toString, it wouldn't work because the number, you would see in the output that the number would be 20.0 or whatever. Okay. Yeah, generally what you want to do when you do a toString is you want to build it by hand, because you have no idea what, if this is using this is a point, but in the line example, you don't want to be just printing out point 1, because you have no idea what point 1 is going to look like. You have to use point1.x, point1.y. Okay, so sorry. We had just talked about how you create the new points. They wanted you to display the 2 points objects here. So this executes P1 and P2 toString. Display P1 distance from origin. Translate it. Yeah, so really the problem is that people just didn't pay attention to the instructions that were right here when you deleted them. Okay, so let's go to the next problem. We're going to go to 17. So 17, what is a constructor? I think most people got this, but let's go through it anyways. Again, the order will be shuffled, but a constructor is declared without a return type, yes. A constructor is a special method that creates an object and initializes its state. Yes, a constructor is the code that's called when you use the new keyword. I would add to this that a constructor has to have the exact same name, case included, of your class, okay? And we already said it doesn't have a return type. And it also doesn't take any arguments. Well, no, that's not true. Sorry, it can take arguments. It just depends on the object. Okay, so what's not true? A constructor can be used instead of fields to represent the data inside of a class. So there is no substitute for a constructor. Using a constructor instead of fields, I'm not even sure what that means. A constructor wastes memory in the computer? No, that's not right. A class can have many methods but only one constructor? Nope, you can have several constructors with different arguments. It's overloaded. Constructors are considered bad programming? No, that's not true. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one, 18. Okay, 18. This is just a simple constructor, as you would see here. Here, let me go back to what the original was. So the original has int x and int y, and again, I still see this all the time in people's code, even though we've gone over it several times now. In a constructor, if you declare int x and int y, those are very local variables, only available between here and here. Okay, what you're trying to do is you're trying to affect the this.x and the this.y. Okay, and again, let's go back and show you in 16. Here's the point class. Okay, this is what you're trying to affect, is the class variables that are valid throughout the entire class. Okay, so that's why you don't want to declare another int x here. Okay, you need to use this.x. Okay. And the other problem is that it's got a void there, right? So we don't want the void. So we get rid of the void. We just use x and y, okay? So that's the constructor error. Let's go to 19. Constructor name. Let's first take a look at SelfCheck 8.7 to remind us of this class, name class. So here's 8.7. It's a public class with these three private fields. One problem is that some people, they declared this middle initial as a string. Actually needs to be a char. Okay, that's one problem, because if you got that wrong, then you probably may have had troubles doing it otherwise. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to remind ourselves of. Then we want to take a look at SelfCheck 8.11. So this adds two methods to the class, get normal order and get reverse order. Okay, this shows us how to use the fields, middle first, middle last. Okay, and then let's also take a look at 8.15. Oh, we didn't do 8.15. You didn't need to use 8.15 either. So now let's go back to the original problem. So for some reason, several people not only tried to declare the constructor. This is a constructor here. How do we know it's constructor? Because number one, the name of the function is exactly the same as the class. Number two, there's no return definition. There's no return value type. Okay, that tells us that it's a constructor. For some reason, people also tried to throw in these two functions: get normal orders, get reverse order. Okay, it doesn't ask you to do that. Okay, it says you may want to consult these, but no, you're not supposed to do that. Okay, you're supposed to add a constructor to the name class that accepts the first, middle, last names parameters and initializes names object. And it says right here, you don't need to write the class headers or declare the fields. Okay, which is what was done in this problem here, 8.7. You don't need to do that. It says it right there. Don't do that. So I don't know why a bunch of people decided to do it anyways. This is the code that they're asking for. Okay, just the constructor. And again, let's review, what do we put in the constructor? So if 8.7, let's close this. If 8.7 here has these three fields, first name, last name, and middle name, in the constructor, we want to use the this.firstName, okay? If we redeclare this and we put string first name, all that's going to do is create a local variable that only exists in this file in this routine between these two brackets, okay? That is not going to change the object that is being created, okay? You need to use the this.firstName and the this.middlename and the this.lastName, okay? So that was the constructor 8.19. So now let's go back and see about 20. Okay, the this keyword. So again, these are shuffled. Let's look at the things that it's true. It refers to an object on a method or a constructor which has been to the object on a, this is really confusing. It's called the implicit parameter. So this, so this is a hard one to parse, but the way to read it is it's a method or constructor that has been called. So somewhere we've created an object. Let's say it's the name object, okay? This refers to that object, okay? And it can be used to access or set an object's fields, yes. It can be used to call the object's methods, yes. It can be used to call one constructor from another, yes. Is it used when one object wants to access the data from a second object? No, because you can't do that if the data is private. You can't do it at all. A particular routine won't even know anything about another object unless it's being passed into it. Is it required when a class has more than one constructor? No. It's only required if you're going to have the parameter names as the same name as the local fields. So if we went back to 8.7, here, this is, well, actually, let's look at 18, no, 19. Okay, so here, this was required because we had the same parameter name as the object's private data name. If I just do this one thing and just change the name of all three of these, don't ask why I'm doing that, why I'm calling it that. Okay, so then I no longer need this. And the reason why is because the compiler can now understand what the difference is. Okay, it knows that first name is referring to the this.firstName, the first name in the object. Okay, so let me undo those and I'll get back out of here. Okay, so that was 20. Let me close a few windows here. And let's go to 21. 21, constructor point. Such a simple problem. All I want you to do is add a constructor to the point class that accepts point as a parameter, okay, and initializes a new point. So let's refresh our memory with going back to the point class. Here's the point class. It's got an X and a Y. It's got a constructor for a 0, 0 point and a point at a particular XY. Okay, so now they're asking us to construct it with a point P. So some people just thought they could just say, oh, I'm going to just create a local point P here equals P. And maybe I could, if I was at least a little bit smarter, I could maybe change the name so that I wouldn't have to use this.p. That's not going to do anything. What this is going to do is it's going to create, again, a local, just a local variable that's only valid between these brackets. And it's not going to affect creating the this object. Okay, that's not going to help at all. So don't create a new one. What you need to do is look at what the object actually has. The object actually has an X and a Y. Okay, that means in your constructor you better well set the X and the Y. Okay, and so we're going to get the p.x and the p.y. Okay, that's what your constructor is going to do. Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion from people about, what are these things here? These are the class variables that are available throughout all these routines. And when you create a new point with, let's say you create a new point of 8, 2, okay? Where does that 8 and that 2 go? They go right here. That's where the 8 goes. That's where the 2 goes. Okay. So if you go and you try to create your own int x here and your own int y, that isn't going to work. Okay. These are again local variables only available inside this function. They don't change the object that you created. Okay. So the whole point of the constructor is to take its parameters, that 8 and the 2, and then set the x and the y. Maybe it's most clear for everyone to always use this dot x and this dot y. That makes it a little bit clearer. See, that's they're using the set location, this dot x. Okay, that tells you that it's actually setting the object's x and y values. All right, hopefully that clarifies the latter half of the problem set. Oh, you know what? I need to go over 8.14 again. So again, I've already gone over 8.14 in another video, but let's try to talk more about what the common problems that I saw. So I showed in the problem set instructions right here that the most common problem is that people build the wrong toString. Okay, so let me show you what happens if instead of using p1.x, if I use getX, which I admit is confusing because if I looked at that other problem, I saw that the definition was to return an int, but this is not using that definition. This is using Java's built-in definition. If I submit this, we're going to see that the output for the strings are wrong. So the expected output was just to have this, and instead we got 5.0, 2.0, 7.0, 1.0. Okay, that's the most common problem. So instead of that, you just want to use the XY, XY, okay? And that is true in general. Whenever you're using toString, you should not rely on the implementation underneath this object, like getX, unless you really, really know what the implementation is. So you want to take it apart and access it. Make sure you know what the format is. Okay, another problem people had problems figuring out what do I do with these two arguments, 0.1, 0.2, that are being passed in here. Do I create another point P and my P1 and a point my P2 and set those? No, because again, these would be locals. That does not affect the object that is created. So you have to use this .p1. Okay, whenever you're doing a constructor, look at what the class variables are. Okay, these are the ones that you need to set. Okay, this .p1, this .p2. Getting these are very simple. You just return P1, P2. For some reason, I saw a lot of people trying to return P1 and P2. Oh, another thing people tried to do is they tried to do int x1, int x2, int y1, int y2 instead of these. Okay, but then they just blindly went ahead as if they had declared P1 and P2, and they started trying to assign this P1, this P2, or they would try to return P1 or P2, like it had somehow magically been stored. So the only thing that stores variables is the constructor. Well, at least that's initially the case. Okay, so you had to have stored it into a P1 that you declared. So you could possibly do it with x1, x2, y1, y2, but you can't do it if you're then expecting P1 and P2 to be there. Okay, so that's a problem that a bunch of people had. Let's see what other problems they have. So that's pretty much it. There's been a lot of confusion. Definitely, I would say number one, read the book. Okay. Number two, watch the videos, both my lecture and the answers to the original video I did with answers to these first few self-checks, and play with it. Okay, you need to understand how to do 8.14 or you will pay the consequences on the quiz. Okay, I do expect you guys to understand how to do the point and the line classes. It's very important. Okay, all right, good luck to you.